In the silent halls of Richmond Palace, a dying whisper tore through Elizabeth I's world. A secret mercy denied, a betrayal she never saw, and a plea that came too late ignited a fury no queen had ever known. Her body began to fail, poisoned by her relentless pursuit of beauty, while her mind unravelled in fear, guilt, and hallucinations. For days she refused to lie down, powerless yet defiant, as the crown quietly slipped from her grasp. The Virgin Queen faced death alone, haunted by secrets, decay, and the unbearable price of absolute power. The Queen, who had once commanded armies and nations, whose very presence could silence a room, began to vanish behind her own eyes. At 69, Elizabeth I felt the weight of 45 years of unbroken rule pressing down on her like a stone she could no longer lift. Isolation had become her closest companion. Friends, allies, and confidants who had once surrounded her now lay gone, dead or estranged, leaving her court filled with strangers and hollow gestures. Each passing day became a trial not of politics but of endurance. Ambassadors from distant lands recorded her sudden melancholy, noting her frequent talks of death, as if mortality hovered just beyond the palace walls, tangible and inevitable. Elizabeth would sit for hours without speaking, staring into nothing, her hands resting limply on the arm of her chair, tears sometimes spilling without warning. The public had always seen a queen of iron will, a woman who could charm, intimidate, and inspire simultaneously. But in these private hours, behind the heavy curtains and flickering candlelight, the veneer of invincibility crumbled. Her mind wandered to the burdens of a crown that could never be set aside, the endless responsibility of governing a nation alone, without the comfort of those she trusted. The isolation gnawed at her, the constant fear of betrayal and failure growing sharper with each passing day. Elizabeth's health, already fragile, was undermined by this relentless mental strain. Sleep became uneasy, appetite faltered, and even small decisions required a monumental effort. It was as though the years of holding power had finally exacted their toll. The Queen who had once ruled with certainty and charisma was now a shadow of herself, trapped within the unyielding walls of Richmond Palace, facing a collapse that was as psychological as it was physical. The Iron Queen of England was quietly, invisibly breaking, and those around her could only watch helplessly as history slowly turned a page that would end in tragedy. Even as her body weakened, Elizabeth's mind became a battlefield, haunted by ghosts of the past she could no longer silence. The memory of Mary, Queen of Scots, returned with relentless intensity, a shadow that refused to be ignored. 16 years had passed since Mary's execution, yet Elizabeth now wept openly over a decision she once claimed was necessary for England's safety. She spoke to her courtiers with a vulnerability that shocked all who served her, confessing doubts, expressing guilt, and insisting that the death of Mary had never been her true desire. Every whispered memory twisted her pride into anguish. It was not only Mary who haunted her. Catherine Grey, imprisoned for her royal bloodline, and other suppressed claimants to the throne rose in her thoughts like phantoms circling her fragile mind. Elizabeth, who had spent decades controlling succession and eliminating threats, now found herself powerless before these living reminders of the blood she had tried to contain. The irony was cruel. As her body faltered, her enemies were not just alive. They lingered in the court, waiting for her reign to end. Every step she took, every fleeting moment of rest was shadowed by the weight of conscience and history. Courtiers noticed her trembling hands, the frequent distant gaze as if she saw figures no one else could, the sudden sharp intakes of breath as guilt and fear converged. Elizabeth, who had once wielded England with unmatched authority, was now a prisoner of memories she could neither undo nor escape. Her mind, always her greatest weapon, had become her tormentor. In these final weeks, the Queen's private grief became a haunting, silent spectacle of moral reckoning, one that no proclamation, ceremony or pageantry could soothe. She was the ruler of an empire, yet she could not command peace for her own soul. Every ghost, every suppressed secret, every shadowed memory loomed over her, ensuring that the last days of Elizabeth Thusser would be dominated not by triumph, but by the spectral echoes of the lives she had touched and the deaths she could not forget. Elizabeth's body, once a symbol of strength and unyielding authority, began to betray her in ways too horrifying to imagine. What started as a simple irritation in her throat quickly transformed into a relentless, consuming infection. Her neck swelled painfully, glands hardening, pus collecting in hidden pockets that made every breath a struggle. Each swallow felt as if shards of glass cut her from within. Her teeth, long neglected from years of indulgence and harsh treatments, had decayed into blackened stumps, each one a testament to the years of her reign and the body's slow decline. The abscesses spread, leaving her unable to eat solid food or drink without wincing in agony. Exhaustion became constant, pressing her into silence, while pain gnawed at her mind, as if her very body sought to erase her existence. Even the simplest tasks, a tilt of the head, a sip of water, a word whispered to a servant, were accompanied by spasms of torment. She lay or sat in her chambers, moaning quietly at first, then screaming as if the walls themselves could hear her suffering. Her loyal attendants could do nothing but watch, powerless, as the queen who had once dominated nations was reduced to trembling and coughing, gasping for air that seemed to vanish from her throat. Every night she felt as though her own body was conspiring against her, the infection creeping further, a tangible reminder that even the most powerful are not immune to decay. In those final days, the grandeur of Richmond Palace offered no comfort, only the stark contrast of opulence against the ravages of disease. Elizabeth, ruler of England, now faced an enemy that no army could fight, no council could reason with, no crown could shield against. Her body, the vessel of her legendary will, had become a prison of pain, slowly drowning her from within, signalling to all that the end of the Virgin Queen was not a sudden fall, but a creeping collapse of flesh, bone, and vitality. The horror did not end with infection alone. Amid her suffering, a discovery struck Elizabeth and her attendants with disbelief and dread. Her coronation ring, the golden band she had worn for 45 years as a symbol of her sacred union with England, had fused with her finger. Time, swelling and neglect had allowed the metal to embed itself into flesh and bone, leaving a permanent groove. When the court physician and servants attempted to remove it, they had no choice but to file through the gold while she watched, each spark and scrape drawing a fresh scream of pain from the queen. Blood flowed freely, mingling with tears, the metallic scent sharp and unrelenting. The room, usually filled with the disciplined hush of court etiquette, now resonated with her agony. The ring was more than an object. It was a brutal, unyielding reminder of the crown's demands, of her marriage to a nation she could not abandon and which had never spared her ease. It symbolized loyalty, duty, and sacrifice, now turning into torment that mirrored the slow disintegration of her body and mind. Each slice of gold seemed to carve away not just flesh, but her connection to the kingdom she had ruled so fiercely. The physical pain was matched by a deeper emotional devastation. Here was the embodiment of a reign's weight, pressing into her very bones, proving that power comes with consequences no crown can fully shield against. Witnesses could only tremble in silent horror as Elizabeth endured, her composure slipping, her mind alternating between fury, despair, and stoic acceptance. In this moment, the monarchy itself seemed to pierce through her, reminding all who watched that even queens cannot escape the relentless passage of time, nor the cruel intertwining of body, symbol, and sovereignty. The fusion of gold and flesh became a grotesque emblem of her life, unbreakable, painful, and hauntingly permanent. Elizabeth's suffering was not only carved into her flesh, but slowly poisoned by her relentless devotion to beauty. For decades she had applied Venetian ceruse, a white lead makeup to conceal wrinkles and scars, preserving the illusion of eternal youth. At first it was vanity, a tool to command respect and awe, but over time it became a cruel agent of decay. The poison seeped silently into her body, corroding her nerves, clouding her thoughts, and stealing her vitality. Hair fell out in clumps, leaving gaps that no wig could entirely conceal. Her mind faltered, memory lapsing at inconvenient moments, while paranoia crept through her courtly gaze. Mercury, used to colour her lips and remove makeup, further ravaged her system, damaging kidneys and intensifying exhaustion. Drops of belladonna, intended to enhance her eyes, blurred her vision and accelerated cognitive decline. Every application of cosmetics became an act of slow self-destruction. In an ironic twist, the very tools meant to maintain her power and image now threatened to end her life. The Queen, obsessed with perfection and the performance of control, could not see the danger. She applied her poisons daily, sealing a cycle that only death could break. Courtiers watched helplessly as the once mighty Virgin Queen transformed before their eyes, her beauty turning to toxic vulnerability. Her face, once the emblem of authority and strength, became a mirror of decay, a haunting reflection of the cost exacted by relentless obsession with appearance and perception. The chemical assault on her body became inseparable from the emotional strain of her final weeks, the two working together to unravel a queen who had once seemed untouchable. Each morning, as she painted her pallid face, Elizabeth unknowingly etched her own mortality into the canvas of her skin, a silent, inevitable countdown to the final days that history would remember in horror and fascination alike. As the poison of her beauty took hold, Elizabeth's mind began a terrifying descent into chaos. Her body betrayed her first with sudden, uncontrollable fits. She would stiffen, eyes rolling back, muscles rigid, trembling with a force that frightened even her closest attendants. Each spasm was unpredictable, leaving courtiers frozen in helpless anxiety. Between these convulsions, hallucinations seized her. She stared into empty corners of the chamber, whispering as if arguing with invisible enemies, shaking her head at shadows only she could see. The Queen, who had once ruled an empire with calculated precision, now questioned every hand that reached toward her, convinced that plots and poison lurked in every gesture. Doctors were summoned, only to be refused, their treatments rejected with trembling hands and piercing glares. Elizabeth's brilliance, her strategic genius, became entangled with fear, paranoia, and disbelief. Night after night, her attendants watched as she wrestled with phantoms, speaking aloud in fragmented thoughts, her voice cracking between authority and terror. Her once commanding eyes, the symbol of control and diplomacy across Europe, now reflected only confusion, pain, and the fragility of a mind worn down by age, illness, and relentless anxiety. Every heartbeat, every twitch of muscle was amplified by the echoes of guilt over past decisions and the inevitability of death approaching. Even in a room full of loyal subjects, Elizabeth became utterly alone, trapped within the confines of her own failing mind, where logic and reality blurred into a hall of ghosts and memories. The Queen, who had outwitted kings and courtiers, now fought a battle she could not win, her intelligence and sovereignty undermined not by enemies, but by the insidious collapse of her own body and brain. It was a descent both horrifying and tragic, the kind of psychological unraveling that leaves observers spellbound, unsure whether to mourn or recoil in horror, a vivid testament to the cost of power and the fragility of human life. In early March of 1603, Elizabeth's fear of death transformed into an almost supernatural terror of lying down. For her, beds had become instruments of finality, places where the living crossed into the realm of the dead. She stood for 15 hours at a stretch, motionless, refusing the gentle coaxing of her attendants and the anxious whispers of her ladies-in-waiting. The air around her seemed to thicken with dread, a silent tension that no words could ease. When her legs could no longer bear her weight, she collapsed not onto a bed, but onto cushions carefully arranged on the floor, keeping herself upright even in the act of resting. For 4 days and nights she maintained this rigid vigil, refusing to lie down, finger pressed to her lips, eyes fixed as though staring into an unseen horizon. Her refusal was more than superstition. It was a declaration of defiance, a final assertion of control over a body that betrayed her with weakness, pain, and decay. Those around her witnessed a queen caught between life and death, between authority and vulnerability, a sovereign whose very posture became an act of resistance. When a servant timidly suggested she must rest, she snapped with the piercing clarity of a mind that, for all its fragility, retained its power, declaring, "Must is not a word to use to princes." This statement, simple yet commanding, resonated like a final edict, a reminder that Elizabeth's identity and authority could not be coerced, even by illness. The silent vigil was both horrifying and mesmerizing, a testament to the Queen's fear, her stubbornness, and the sheer drama of power colliding with human frailty. Each passing hour deepened the tension in the chamber. Every glance, whisper, and breath weighted with uncertainty. Elizabeth had transformed her own suffering into spectacle, a defiance that was at once noble and tragic, leaving her attendants in awe and dread, as if they were witnessing a ritual of power entwined with the inexorable approach of mortality. In the shadowed chambers of Richmond Palace, the court held its breath. Elizabeth's silence was a force more powerful than any command, more terrifying than any threat. Her ladies-in-waiting hovered like ghosts, holding her delicate hands, their palms slick with sweat, hearts pounding with fear. Every flicker of candlelight threw long, dancing shadows across the walls, and each tiny movement in the room seemed magnified, laden with meaning. The Queen's eyes, wide and alert, darted at unseen shapes, searching corners where no one stood, trembling in quiet terror of the dark. Even as she was surrounded by the people who had devoted decades to her service, Elizabeth was utterly alone, trapped in a body that refused to obey, and a mind that wrestled with both hallucination and dread. Small bursts of violence broke the tense quiet. A bowl of broth flung across the room, the porcelain shattering on the stone floor, startling everyone, a reminder that the sovereign still wielded authority, even in weakness. At night the fear intensified. She woke with a start, heart hammering, whispering to shadows, scanning the room as if enemies lurked behind tapestries or beneath carved furniture. The court existed in a suspended state, unable to breathe, each person silently praying, each second stretching endlessly. There was no comfort, only the shared dread of witnessing the slow, agonizing unraveling of a monarch who had once been invincible. Their vigilance became ritualistic, lighting candles that never extinguished, whispering reassurances that went unheard, and maintaining a fragile, desperate composure in the presence of a queen who was both alive and drifting toward death. In those hours, fear became a living entity, curling through the chamber like smoke, wrapping everyone in its suffocating embrace. Every glance at Elizabeth revealed the paradox of power and vulnerability. She was the centre of a kingdom, yet powerless against her own body, a living reminder that even a queen could be rendered human by time, illness, and terror. Even as Elizabeth clung to life, the machinery of power did not pause. The Privy Council, composed of the kingdom's most cunning minds, gathered quietly in her chamber, their faces a mask of respect concealing urgency and ambition. Every shallow breath of the Queen was noted, every flicker of her eyelid analysed for meaning. Robert Cecil moved like a shadow, sending coded messages to distant allies, securing favours and testing loyalties with subtle gestures. Names were whispered with careful calculation. James of Scotland, the inevitable heir, floated on everyone's lips, but none dared speak it too loudly. Some claimed Elizabeth made a faint gesture, an acknowledgement of the future monarch, while others swore she did nothing at all, leaving the decision suspended between fate and manipulation. The tension was almost unbearable. Each advisor walked a careful line between loyalty and opportunism, knowing that the crown's passing would reward brilliance and punish hesitation. Power itself seemed to hover in the room, tangible and electric, like a storm ready to break. The Queen, frail and unsteady, remained unaware of the full scale of the plotting around her, yet her presence dominated the room with the gravity of a force that could not be ignored. Courtiers adjusted their posture, softened their tone, and calculated every word, aware that the smallest misstep could be fatal. Outside the chamber, the kingdom waited unknowingly, blissfully unaware that the crown was already shifting hands, even before Elizabeth's final breath. Inside, political intrigue wrapped around the Queen like chains, silent and inescapable. What was once a smooth succession now resembled a delicate dance of spies, emissaries, and secret correspondences, all orchestrated while the monarch herself was too weak to intervene. History would remember the orderly passing of power, but the truth was chaos, tension, and raw human ambition, pressing against the frailty of a dying queen. A reminder that the Game of Thrones had begun long before the first tomb was closed. The final morning arrived quietly, almost deceptively peaceful, as if the world itself held its breath. The Archbishop knelt beside Elizabeth, murmuring prayers in a low, steady voice that sought to calm the fragile queen and prepare her soul for the inevitable. Elizabeth, pale and trembling, turned her gaze to him, eyes clouded yet sharp with the remnants of her commanding spirit. For a moment, silence stretched like a taut rope, each heartbeat echoing in the hushed chamber. Then, as if surrendering to the inevitable, a deep calm washed over her. She spoke softly, not with the authority of a ruler, but with the fragile, intimate voice of a woman, aware of the limits of life. Those present, the closest and most loyal, watched in awe as the once mighty queen seemed to exhale decades of tension, fear, and exhaustion in one serene breath. Her body, worn and betrayed by age, illness, and the relentless pursuit of perfection, relaxed as though finally permitted to rest. Time itself seemed to pause when her chest fell still, the quiet punctuated only by the faint crackle of burning candles and the soft rustle of silk garments. Eyewitnesses described her passing as astonishingly gentle, like a leaf floating down from a tree, an image at odds with the tempest she had commanded for 45 years. The Virgin Queen, whose presence had dominated every corner of England and whose decisions had shaped wars, alliances and lives, was gone. Her death was not marked by dramatic fanfare or violent spectacle, but by an eerie, almost sacred silence. In that chamber, history turned a page quietly, irreversibly, leaving the kingdom to face both the loss of a ruler and the uncertainty of the future. What had once been a living, breathing force of authority, cunning and pride now rested in stillness, leaving those who survived to reckon with the magnitude of her absence and the gravity of the crown that awaited the next hands to hold it. Even before Elizabeth's last breath had fully faded from Richmond Palace, the machinery of power began to move with ruthless efficiency. A sapphire ring, cold and heavy from the Queen's hand, was snatched by Robert Carey, her loyal yet desperate messenger. Without hesitation, he mounted his horse and galloped into the pre-dawn mist, the chill biting through his garments as urgency propelled him forward. The journey to Scotland was brutal. He switched horses relentlessly, urging each steed past exhaustion, ignoring his own wounds and fatigue. Bloodied and bruised from the relentless ride, Carey pressed on through frost, wind, and the quiet towns still unaware of history, unfolding above their heads. Every mile carried the weight of destiny, every heartbeat a countdown to a moment that would shape the fate of England and Scotland alike. By the time he arrived, nearly collapsing from the effort, James of Scotland received the news. The throne, still warm from Elizabeth's hand, had already shifted before the kingdom had begun to mourn. What had been a slow, ceremonial passing of power transformed into a race against time, raw and merciless, revealing the stark truth that while monarchs may die, ambition moves faster than grief. The scene exposed the fragile illusion of control. While the nation wept, decisions and succession had already been sealed by those who acted without hesitation. Carey's desperate ride symbolised more than a message. It was a violent assertion that the crown would not wait for sorrow. History was written not in gentle handshakes or formal proclamations, but in sweat, blood and speed. Elizabeth's reign had ended, yet the empire she'd ruled so fiercely now teetered on the edge of uncertainty, claimed in an instant by ambition, urgency, and the cold pragmatism of those who knew that time, unlike loyalty or mourning, would not pause for sentiment. Elizabeth had made one final desperate request. Her body must not be cut open. She had faced death with courage, yet even in that she sought dignity and control over the last mystery she would ever command. Her wishes were ignored. After her death, the royal attendants, following tradition, proceeded with the disembowelment and embalming, sealing her body in a lead-lined coffin. At first, everything seemed as it should. Sombre rituals performed with precision, mourners moving in slow procession, the kingdom paying its respects. But death is never silent, not when life was lived in such extremes. Inside the sealed coffin, decomposition had begun, building pressure as gases formed and expanded within the body. Weeks passed, and the air grew thick with the unspoken horror hidden beneath the ceremonial grandeur. Then, during the funeral procession, a violent crack echoed from inside the lead shell, an explosion that sent an invisible shiver through the onlookers, though they would never know the truth. The coffin remained outwardly intact, the effigy atop it hiding the grotesque reality beneath. To those standing in the street, the Queen was peaceful, regal, eternal. Yet inside, her body had become a vessel of decay, a stark reminder that even royalty cannot conquer the inevitabilities of life and death. The grotesque irony was clear. Elizabeth had ruled an empire, commanded armies, navigated politics with unmatched skill, yet in the end she could not control the simplest, most human of processes. Even death mocked her authority. The silent horror of her decomposing body contrasted violently with the public display of pomp and reverence, a cruel testament to the illusions of monarchy. In life she had been untouchable. In death she became a tragic, horrifying symbol of the ultimate limits of power. The corpse that would not stay silent had become a secret horror that only time, decay, and history could whisper about, hidden beneath the bright, unyielding facade of royal pageantry. Even as Elizabeth's true body rotted within the lead-lined coffin, the world outside remained blissfully unaware, mesmerised by a crafted illusion. A lifelike effigy was prepared to take her place, the final deception of a queen who had spent her life controlling appearances. Pale, with flawless skin and cheeks touched with delicate rouge, her red wig gleamed as if catching the light of eternity. Her eyes, painted to glimmer with intelligence and command, seemed alive, and the royal robes draped over her were perfect, heavy with embroidery, encrusted with jewels that had once symbolised her authority. The effigy was a triumph of artistry and cruelty, hiding the grotesque truth beneath. It was Elizabeth as she had always wished to be remembered, eternal, regal, untouchable, and young, the Virgin Queen unbroken by time or decay. Courtiers, ambassadors, and citizens alike bowed in awe, mourning a woman who appeared to defy death itself. The illusion was so convincing that no one dared suspect that inside the real queen had succumbed not only to illness, but to the ravages of her poisoned beauty and failing body. In this final act, image overtook reality completely. The effigy became a stage on which history could perform the story of Elizabeth I, the way she had always wanted it told, a queen who controlled every narrative, even beyond the grave. And yet, beneath the silk, lead, and painted face, the cruel reminder of mortality lay concealed, a corpse that no one would ever see but whose existence haunted every brushstroke and jewel. This perfect lie reinforced the theme that Elizabeth's power had always been as much about perception as reality. In life, she had mastered illusion and loyalty, commanding respect and fear in equal measure. In death, the effigy ensured her empire's memory remained untarnished by decay or human frailty, a final testament to a queen who ruled with cunning, beauty, and unrelenting control. The world would remember the queen she wanted them to see, not the suffering she endured, nor the horrors that death had left behind. The world moved on quickly, almost brutally indifferent to the death of Elizabeth II. Her wishes, her struggles, her pain, all were swiftly buried beneath protocol and politics. She was laid to rest beside her sister Mary Run, the very woman she had feared, rivalled, and surpassed in life, uniting their legacies in a single tomb. Portraits that had once immortalised her presence in the throne room were removed or replaced, leaving empty spaces that symbolised a reign fading into history. Her dresses, meticulously preserved for decades, were discovered rotting from the lead in her makeup and cosmetics, a cruel irony given her obsession with appearance and perfection. The very tools she had used to maintain her image, powders, paints, and potions, had become instruments of decay, leaving remnants that were swiftly destroyed, burned to prevent their deadly legacy from harming others. The court, the advisors, and the populace all acted as if her death had been a necessary reset, a chance to erase a monarch's mortality and human flaws from the story of England. Yet the truth lingered like a ghost in the corridors she once commanded. Elizabeth had paid the ultimate price for the crown she had wielded with such skill and force: isolation, obsession, and the toxic pursuit of eternal beauty. The cost of absolute power was laid bare for those who dared to look beyond the ceremonious masks. Her life, now sealed in history, revealed the fragile human being beneath the crown, the woman who had borne the burdens of empire while slowly succumbing to betrayal, decay, and fear. Those who came after learned, silently and inevitably, that the throne could grant supremacy over nations, yet it could never conquer the inevitability of mortality. Elizabeth's reign ended in elegance and ceremony, but her life's final truths whispered warnings. Power isolates, beauty poisons, and the relentless desire to control leaves scars that not even death can hide. In the quiet aftermath, history recorded her as the Virgin Queen, timeless and untouchable, but the irony of her demise, the erasure, the decay, the final judgment, remained hidden behind the masks of remembrance. Elizabeth's life was a study in contrasts. Power as absolute yet isolating, beauty as a weapon yet ultimately poisonous, control as a crown yet a prison. She had ruled one of the most powerful kingdoms in Europe, yet in the end she faced the greatest battles alone. Against her failing body, her haunted mind, and the relentless passage of time, every choice she made, every alliance she formed, and every enemy she vanquished carried a weight that no advisor or courtier could share. Her obsession with image and perfection, maintained for decades through layers of leaded makeup and ritualized presentation, had protected her from public scrutiny, but corroded her from within. Her relentless vigilance had kept foreign threats at bay and internal conspiracies in check, but it left her without the comfort of true companionship or trust. In her final days, the illusions of power cracked, exposing the vulnerability beneath. She sat upright on cushions, silent and terrified, watching time slip through her fingers, realizing that absolute authority could not shield her from mortality. The ghosts of Mary, Queen of Scots, Catherine Grey, and countless others she had outlived returned to remind her that history cannot be commanded, only experienced. Yet even in this bleak reflection, there was grandeur, the courage to maintain her dignity until the very end, the defiance of fear and weakness, and the brilliance of a mind that had shaped an empire. Elizabeth's story, like her final breath, is a cautionary tale. No crown, no beauty, and no power can protect a human soul from loneliness, decay, or the ultimate reckoning of death. History remembers her as the Virgin Queen, timeless, regal, and commanding, but those who understand the private struggles know the true cost of her reign. In every echo of her court, in every shadow of her portraits, her life speaks of sacrifice, endurance, and the haunting truth that being queen is both a privilege and a burden beyond imagining. The price was written not in chronicles or monuments, but in the silence of her final solitary moments,